This video will explain the OR out strategy. The OR out strategy says, use when you have a disjunction available whose disjuncts might imply your goal. Assume each disjunct separately and try to derive your goal from each using the arrow in strategy. If you succeed, derive your goal from the disjunctions and the conditionals that were created by the arrow in steps by OR out. So let's see how this works in a proof. So suppose we have the argument, if A or B, then not C and not D. We also have the premise A and E or not F. And then we have the premise not F, if not F, then not C. And we want the conclusion not C. So the first thing we notice is that we have a disjunction. And we also have a conditional whose antecedent is a match for one of the disjuncts and whose consequent is the same thing as our goal. So what we need in order to get our goal, not C, this suggests we might try an OR out strategy to get not C. But what we need is the other conditional. So we need a conditional whose antecedent is a match for the other disjunct, so A and E, and which also leads to the consequent not C. Well, we don't have such a conditional, so we need to create it by arrow in. So we're going to assume the antecedent, and it has a complex antecedent, but that's really no difference. Okay, then we need an assumption dependence column, so lines 1, 2, 3, and 4 all depend on themselves because they're either assumptions or provisional assumptions. So now we want to use A and E to try and get not C. Okay, well, I'll start by taking out an A from line 4 by 4 ampersand out, and that will depend on 4. And then I'm going to poof in a B, A wedge B, by 5 wedge in. And that will depend on what line 5 depends on, so that depends on 4. Then I can use that A wedge B to get not C and not D from line 1, so using 1 and 6 and the rule of arrow out. And that will depend on what 1 depends on and what 6 depends on. So it'll depend on 1 and 4. And then line 8, I can get not C by 7 ampersand out. And so that will depend on what 7 depends on. So that'll depend on 1 and 4. And so I can get my conditional A and E arrow not C by lines 4 through 8 arrow in. And that will depend on just on 1. And then I can derive not C by wedge out. And so I'm going to use lines 2, that's the line that contains the disjunction. And I'm going to use line 9, that's the line that contains the conditional whose antecedent is a match for the left disjunct. And then I'm going to use line 3. So you just write 2, 9, 3, and then the rule of wedge out. And that's going to depend on what 2 depends on, what 9 depends on, and what 3 depends on. So 2 and 3 depend on themselves, and 9 depends on 1, so this depends on 1, 2, and 3. So that's the wedge out strategy in action. Sometimes you'll have to derive both conditionals. In this case, we only needed to derive one of them. But it's pretty common that you'll maybe just need to derive one of them.